bit easier by giving a bit of background on the My Money, My Planet campaign. So we started the My Money, My Planet campaign in April this year, just after COVID, with the whole thought that basically we need to change the way the money impacts our planet. And the whole concept was to increase awareness on the fact that all of us have the right to ask where our money is being saved. And more importantly, to understand and increase awareness on what sustainable finance is all about. Because we needed to take actions, we needed people to take actions. So as they took actions, they could sign manifestos, tag their banks, and share. And a lot of you who might be here actually did it. A lot of you who are joining on Facebook as well as on our Facebook group might be aware of the campaign as well. And a lot of this was sparked from this, that when we did a lot of surveys, we found that 67% of the people actually did not understand how a bank really works. And I think broadly, and this is anecdotal, around 50% of the 67% actually feel that when they get the money is actually kept as cash somewhere. And that's what we wanted to do. And I remember talking to Wilfred when we had a chat and we were like, we need to make these people aware. And that was the whole attempt of the campaign, to get everyone to talk to each other and not just keep criticizing each other. And that's what we aim to do. And that's what we want to do in this session. So we made some progress so far, because of which we are having the session today. We've had a bunch of letters which were sent out to banks. Some dialogues was also done. So that's what has led to this session. And so what I'll do is I will stop talking right now. So this session is going to be 40 minutes long, and there would be 20 to 25 minutes for discussion, followed by Q&A. But Chloe, I know you already have crowdsourced a lot of questions, so I will just pass over the screen to you if you have anything to share, or we can just kickstart the discussion now.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Chloe. I work as a campaigner on sustainability issues in EU politics mainly, and I do quite a lot. And indeed, I've been crowdsourcing some questions because I am not from the sustainable finance world. I'm more from civil society. And so I asked people that I knew, I asked on social media if people had questions, and they did. They had a lot of questions, and they seem to be really, really interested on the issue. So I'll dive straight into my first question, which is that we see more and more reports, NGOs are being more and more vocal on the link between the banking sector and finance, and the impacts on the planet and the impacts on people. So just last week, there was a report by a coalition of NGOs, which is called Forest and Finance, and they actually released a report that made the link between deforestation, human rights, and investment from banks in the 3 main forested areas in the world. So we definitely see a surge in transparency. And this kind of comes with more and more demand from consumers about how their money is being spent, and is it being spent in deforestation, in fossil fuel, in activities that are harming both the planet and people. So my first question is actually for all the panelists, and it's, is it really possible today for banks to ensure that they're not actually investing in activities that have a high social and or environmental impact? And if this is possible, are you all doing this in your respective organizations? So maybe we can do it on my screen the way I see you, so that will be easier. The first person on my right is Wilfred. So if you want to start.
Thank you for the invitation, and also for the question. Indeed, it is the right question, given the impact of finance and the presence of large financial institutions in almost all sectors. The question is, how can you avoid negative impact of your activities? And for that, we apply something which we call sector policies, which means you define for the most sensitive sectors, you define minimum criteria. Yes, you are in agriculture, you're in mining, you're in defense, but you say there are limits to what we want to do. And if a company cannot respect those limits, we will not finance them anymore. We have at this stage a list of, I think, almost 1,000 companies worldwide that cannot live up to those standards of environmental or social elements or human rights elements. Of course, it's nice to do that as a bank, but you need to onboard also the other banks in that. And therefore, I'm very happy that last year the principles for responsible banking have been applied. Almost 185 banks now have joined in. And the main message there is try to reduce the negative impact of your activities, or preferably prevent them, and increase the positive impact. So that would be my first response.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wilfried, for that. Then I see Dan on my screen. So do you want to go next?
Nice, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. Really interesting question, I think. And Wilfried gave already a response. Part of the response I was also wanted to giving, but I think it starts with transparency, and I want to say something about it, how we put it in practice. And I want to make a distinction between savings money and investment money, because that are two different things. On the savings money that we are using to finance projects by business lending or mortgage lending, what we do is put all the customers and projects that which we finance with the money, the savings money of the people, we put it on our website, and it's available for all customers and non-customers. So you can be assured it's 100%, you know, 100% where your money is going to if you put savings money with the deals. On the investment side, we apply the same rule. In fact, all companies our investment funds have invested in are publicly available in the annual and semi-annual reports. So we are, in my opinion, 100% transparent on what we are doing with the money. And on the second part of the question, how we can assure that we are not investing in activities with high social and environmental impact, we apply a similar assessment as Wilfried was referring to. We also have a list of minimum standards. I think we are a bit stricter than the large banks in Belgium. For example, we exclude totally the fossil energy in our minimum standards. And it's a list of conditions, minimum requirements that all companies should comply to in order to be accepted to our investment universe. So, and as all other things, and transparency is important for us, these minimum standards are also publicly available now on our website. And there are three large categories. In fact, it's human dignity linked to the human rights. It's a list of requirements related to planet awareness, and there is a last one on governance. And this is the way how we deal with it. And I think it's really clear and transparent to all.
Thank you. Thank you for being so transparent towards your customers, I guess. And then maybe we can hear from our last guest.
Yes, good morning. Quite a lot has already been said by Wilfried and Dan, but I would like to add some elements. If I look at our client portfolio, I would say that about roughly 30% of clients are in what I would call sensitive sectors. And for these sensitive sectors, we have developed an environmental social responsibility framework in which we have developed processes to screen our engagement with companies. Very important to know here is that we have, I would say, two transferable topics or approaches, that is human rights and climate. These go through all the sectors. And then we have sector approaches as also exist, as Wilfried explained and Dan explained, for instance, on animal welfare, on chemical industries, defense industries, energy industries, forestry and agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and infrastructure works. So for all these sectors, we have specific policies. Perhaps to conclude, one element I would like to add, and that is that in addition to the list of companies with whom we do not want to act or to have commercial relationships, it's very important that we try to engage with companies. So if we find reportings, shortcomings, we will always try to set up a dialogue process with these companies to see how these okay, how these defects, how these topics, issues can be resolved, and how we can help as a bank these companies to improve their environmental and social responsibility tracking.
Thank you all. I just wanted to follow up, but it's actually a question for all of you, but something that Wilfried said at the beginning is try to reduce the environmental impacts or the social impacts of the companies you invest in. But we now know that at least when it comes to climate, we need more than just reducing the environmental impacts. We need a radical change. And there's the Paris Agreement that was approved in 2015, and it has a very strict target of 2 degrees and ideally even below 1.5 degrees. And there are scientist reports that say that we have a limited amount of time. We need to reduce our carbon emission by 70% by 2030 if we want to actually have a chance to stay below 1.5. So my question is, this requires a radical change. Let's put it that way. I think this is a really important word, and we shouldn't be afraid of being radical, but is one of your objectives to ensure that your investments are in line with the Paris Agreement? And if so, how long would it take? And I guess then the question is, would it be achievable in the time frame that is necessary to actually achieve the Paris Agreement? We can do it the same way, or we can start on the right. So maybe Gert, do you want to go first?
Yes, well, very good question, obviously. Yeah? Climate change is obviously a very, very, very important topic, probably the most important topic for the coming decades. So it is also very important to us. And as of the beginning, ING has identified climate change as being very important, and we also decided, okay, we want to take the lead in this process. And together with a number of banks, and BNP was one of them, we signed the Katowice Agreement, in which we pledged that we would drive our credit portfolio towards the Paris agreements. Okay, pledge is interesting, but how do you come there? And then it becomes a bit more difficult. And for that, we have looked into our credit portfolio, and we have identified a number of sectors where we can really make a big difference. So we're now currently, we have these sectors, we have analyzed these sectors, and we know now, okay, how is this sector developing on the whole, and how is our credit portfolio developing? Yeah, and for instance, I can tell you that half of our credit portfolio is mortgages. So one of the big challenges will be, okay, how can we bring the totality of our mortgage portfolio towards Paris Agreement? So that's one where there's challenges. There are others where there are less challenges. For instance, if you look at our energy portfolio, we're already on track. So we're now studying for all these difficult sectors, and there's for instance also steel, there's transport, there's shipping, cement, others, where we really have detailed studies on where we are, on where we have the biggest impact. Because for instance, if you look at automotive, where will you have the biggest impact? Well, it's probably not by focusing on the dealer networks. It's probably you will have the biggest impact by focusing on the construction, the producers of cars, and you help them to shift towards electric motors. There you will have probably bigger impact than if you work on other players in the chain. So we're also looking where in all these production chains will we have the biggest impact. And there we obviously sit around the table with these companies and discuss, okay, what are your plans? How are you going to develop towards Paris agreements?
Okay, so it's a lot about collaboration. That's what I understand. And
it's a lot about collaboration with your clients, but also with other banks, because I mean, we can make a difference, but we want to lead and we want to work together with other banks, because this is something that we will have to do together. Not only us, but all the banks together will have to move in the same direction, and that's how you will have your impact.
For sure. Thanks, Dan, because I know Triodos has a specific approach on climate, so maybe you can tell us more about that.
Absolutely, yeah, maybe similar to what Geert was saying, Triodos Bank has also signed a pledge alongside the Paris Agreement in 2015 to measure and disclose the carbon emission, and to ensure that we live up to the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. Out of this initiative, it's a Dutch pledge. In fact, it's an initiative together with a number of other Dutch banks. There is a methodology developed that is called the PCAF methodology, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. Because if you want to set targets, yeah, it starts with measuring your impact, I think. So that's for us the start, and we have done it already since 2017. We have applied it first to our own operations, because I think if you want to change the world, you have to start with yourself. So since 2015, we see that we have decreased our own carbon emission per FTE with 30%. So we are well on the way to achieve the ambition of the Paris Agreement in that way. But of course, if we look into the carbon emission of Triodos, it's 3 kiloton a year. It's nothing compared with the influence of the impact we can have with the projects and the investments we are doing and we are dealing with. So last year we have extended the PCAF model to all our loans and investments. We have started measuring it, and this year, together with the PCAF initiative, we will set the targets for reducing carbon emissions on the whole investment and loan portfolio, to be able to know where we have to go and which targets we have to set to reach the ambition of the Paris Agreement. So, but that's the way we are approaching it, and yeah, for us it's really important to make it as concrete and science-based as possible. Otherwise, we are speaking about ambitions, but we have to make it as concrete as possible. And so we are really believing in this way of working, in this model, and the path we have set to reach the goals.
Thanks for that, Wilfried.
I think the main elements have been brought into discussion. As a bank, you have your direct impact, your energy you use, the travel you have, the buildings, and can you become climate neutral by reducing it? And what is left by doing compensation? Yeah, then you can become climate neutral. Secondly, how do you work with your suppliers? For instance, BNP Paribas, we buy every year for 10 billion euros in terms of products and services. How do you integrate elements of climate in the relationship? Who do you choose and do you integrate it in there? And then finally, I think Geert has explained the biggest example in the credit portfolio. For instance, if you take the BNP Paribas credit portfolio towards companies, we're talking about 700 billion. How do you make sure that indeed gradually you reduce your exposure to CO2? I give you an example. Electricity production. At this moment, we finance 299 grams per kilowatt hour. This is below the average of Europe or global, but it's still 299 grams per kilowatt hour. If we follow a scenario, and there the models come in, the International Energy Agency has developed scenarios for most of the sectors. This has to go down to 81 grams per kilowatt hour by 2040. So this means that in evaluating your customers, in evaluating transactions, you will see, will this contribute to this roadmap that will lead to, I think at this moment, the scenarios with the National Energy Agency are targeting, I think 1.8 degrees. So it is in line with the 2 degrees, but it's gonna be between 1.5 and 2, the scenarios that are on the table now.
My next question, I guess, is more specifically targeting Wilfried and Geert and the banks that you represent. It's about divestment. So there's been this global movement, notably led by the organization 350.org, asking organizations, big organizations that have investments in fossil fuel to divest. Essentially, it's that. And we've seen in the past few years that quite a few organizations, and including really big ones, are starting to divest. I'm talking universities, I'm talking pension funds, I'm talking insurance companies, and even the European Investment Bank announced a strategy to start divesting last year. And I don't know if you saw, but yesterday the Environmental Committee of the European Parliament voted on the EU climate law, so the law that will make sure that EU reaches its carbon neutrality targets. And one of the things they actually are asking is that we stop fossil fuel subsidies by 2025. So it's like the regulatory process, but also organizations slowly, it's all starting to get together and really understand that we can't keep pouring that much money into the fossil fuel industry, considering its impacts on climate. So I'm going to ask you to answer that question, but very, very, not, I don't know if fast is the right word, but in a very concise way, because essentially, I'm sure you have a lot of argument, but essentially it's almost a yes or no question. So are you considering at some point, or is it just not on the table, divesting from fossil fuel investments in the future? Because I'm guessing this is not on the table right now. So maybe Wilfried, you can start. Sorry, I know it's a challenging one.
I've learned in my career to say never. But the important steps that we are taking is also the build-up. Like the EIB, it's about the strategy. You start with the most detrimental parts. That's what we've done. BNP Paribas has been the first bank to decide we step out of tar sands, out of shale, out of companies that are only involved in shale gas, in shale oil, in Arctic drilling. In the US, this decision of 2 years ago, it costs us like 100 million in terms of revenues. Then we decided in Poland to step out of the power companies that we're building on coal. We left 10 of our customers. Then we decided to own coal, to not anymore, and that's also a decision of 2 years ago, not anymore to invest in new projects in terms of coal-fired power generation. And now this year on thermal coal, we decided we have a deadline on how do we step out of there. So by 2030, we step out of thermal coal in all OECD countries. In 2040, we should be out of this sector in the rest of the world. This means that we expect, and we are actually building on that strategy now, we are now going through the portfolio, and we expect that in that sector, we will probably have to say goodbye to half of the customers that are related to that activity. So what it brings, this is the first step. We start with the most detrimental, there we take a choice. When it comes to the rest of the fossil fuel industry, I refer back to the collective commitment to climate action, where we will align our portfolio. And this means that sectors with a huge CO2 exposure, we will also gradually build off.
Great, thank you. That was very clear and was very interesting to hear your answer on that. Then maybe Gert, I would like to know where ING stands on that.
Yes, I will, just like Wilfried did, not answer with yes or no. What Wilfried explained for coal is also applicable for ING, and we in fact want to step out of coal by 2025. So all companies that explore or are dependent on coal will be out of our portfolio by 2025. That's one thing. Second thing, also if you look at Paris, fossil fuels still have their role. And there's debate about it, but they still have their role. And in all our actions, we try to support or to support our scientific findings, and for fossils, for energy, you have the International Energy Agency that plays a big role, and for us, the reports of the International Energy Agency are in fact setting out a roadmap. So will we decrease? Yes. Will we immediately stop? No.
Okay, thanks for that. There's a few questions, so I'm going to ask you the last question that I had crowdsourced, and I would love it if you could try to answer within a minute. And it's actually about the future and where you stand. So the question is, how do you see the future of sustainable investments, and what are your next steps in that regard? Some of you sort of answered already, or at least gave elements, but it'd be great if you could summarize it in what are your essential next steps when it comes to sustainable investments, and then we'll move on to the two questions that were asked. I don't know if anyone wants to go next this time. I'm not gonna.
Well, perhaps something that has not been mentioned yet is that if you also would compare the product portfolio of banks 10 years ago with product portfolio today, you see there's a huge shift in products that support and enable companies to make that switch towards a more sustainable and a greener future. So that is very important, that you see that banks are really developing products to help their clients to make that transition towards a more sustainable future. And some of these products are really very nice. For instance, we have developed products where you you award a credit and you have a certain interest. When the company hits the target or goes below, you lower the interest. So it's an incentive for the company, for your client, to really stick to the plan and even to do better than was agreed in the planning. So we're really developing quite a lot of, I would say, financial products to incentivize clients and to help clients, to enable clients to do sustainable related investments.
Thanks for that. Dan, are you still around?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm back. I lost my connection. I'm in home office due to COVID. Connection is not very well at home. So I've missed a part of the discussion. No problem. It's regarding last questions and what are the next steps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
no problem. So yeah, maybe just explaining that we have already made kind of transition over the last 10 years. In fact, we have started with what we call the exclusion. It's based upon the minimal standards. So that was the way we approached our investment portfolio. After that, it was a best-in-class principle, meaning that we invested in almost all sectors, and within these sectors, we selected the companies that performed best, in fact. And now we are on a more positive approach. I think what we're doing is that we select the companies that are actively contributing to positive change in society. And how do we do it? We have 7 transition teams that are based or linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's amongst others sustainable food and agriculture, circular economy, renewable resources. And that's the way we make our selection, not on a negative exclusion, but on a positive change and impact criteria. So this is the way we want to pursue. And next to that, I think that's important and interesting as well. And we have the EU Green Deal. More importantly for our sector, the taxonomy regulation, which we expect a lot from. It's a classification system for sustainable economic activities. And other than the other sustainability labels where you have to apply for, this will in fact impact the whole financial industry. All financial companies and activities will have to screen themselves based upon those taxonomy. So this is something we are really looking forward to, because it has the advantage of implementing a uniform approach. Of course, the only thing we hope for that it's strict and ambitious enough, the classification system. But this is something we see as a game changer for the industry.
Thanks, Wilfried.
Yeah, and then from my side, indeed, I think 2 main things coming up. One is, and Dan mentioned it as positive banking indeed. How can you accompany your customers in the transition? The Green Deal is going to change entire sectors: energy, agriculture, transportation, building. How can you make sure that you accompany your customers in this transition? For this, we have, for instance, a team that accompanies our corporate customers when they have questions on circular economy or energy transition. That's clearly one where you also as a bank choose for the right sectors. We are at this stage at 16 billion investments in renewable energy. That has to go to 18 billion. That's one thing. The other thing is for me related to the importance of what is coming from the regulators and the supervisors. Dan has mentioned the European taxonomy, but don't forget that also the European Central Bank and the national banks are increasingly looking to how climate will impact the stability of the financial sector. we will need, as banks, we will need data. And we will need data from the customers to understand to what extent are they exposed to transition risk and physical risk. This process of being able to capture the data, to process the data, to interpret the data will become one of the biggest challenges for the coming years for the banking sector.
Thank you all. Let's move on to the Q&A from the audience. So there's a first question, but I'm wondering if actually what kind of reporting are you using to assess the environmental and social responsibility tracking? Could you maybe answer that very quickly? Because I think like it's probably just the name of a tool or a web page where you can redirect that person, and then we can move on to the two other questions. Or actually, maybe I should ask the second one as well, and you can answer both at the same time. So the second one, and do you think there are banks and entities that go against the movement of reducing carbon emissions, or can we say that everybody is going into the same and right direction? This could be also interesting, maybe from an EU versus rest of the world perspective, if you have some insights on that. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that specifically.
Perhaps on the reporting, we report every year in our annual report on our policies and the results of our policies, so that can be consulted online. And how do we assess? We use a number of the international standards, and we are quite often assessed national standards. So that's how things work with us. And I think with most of the other banks too, I believe. Then are there any banks going in a different direction? To be honest, I don't think so. I believe that most banks, whether they like it or not, will be forced to move in the direction that I mean we already decided to take. The only question I have, I don't have any view on for instance, banks in China, because they are often using different technologies and logical frameworks than we do.
Maybe
That's
we can.
Dan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, on the reporting, I think we have said already something about the reporting. I have mentioned the PCAF reporting. We have developed an impact reporting together with a number of other banks, the Global Alliance for Banks on Values. We have developed a specific impact reporting measuring a whole kind of impact data. And I think the taxonomy will come, and there will be other initiatives that are influencing or are making the importance of the correct and uniform reporting much higher than today. So that's the way I see it on reporting. The opposite direction. It's like it was mentioned. I don't think it's not the way politics and governments are setting the direction. So that would be very strange. Of course, we're a bit different from the other banks because for the other banks, it's only part of the business model. I would like to say it's not to mention greenwashing, but for us, it's really our core of our mission, the sustainability and the ethical points. So yeah. That's, I hope, clear to all of the audience.
Maybe if I can add, yes. In terms of reporting, what I like very much is that you see more and more banks reporting based on the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the TCFD. If you take, for instance, for BNP, they reported in April such a report which gives you a great overview of how climate is integrated from the governance over the management, over the strategy in the risk models. So that one is really one which I recommend, and I think it can only be further developed. In terms of banks being lagging behind, what I like is that NGOs, but also specialized agencies are indeed tracking banks like other sectors on their ESG performance. How are they performing in environment, social, and governance issues? And then you see who are the top 10 players, and you know that the top 10 players are more integrated in SRI funds, in social responsible investment funds, than the others. Now, I think, and one of the main things we see in the past 3 years is that we're looking at sustainable finance. I'm talking about green bonds, green loans, even transition bonds, that you see that also the big American players are starting to pick up that topic of how can we make sure and help and accompany the companies and governments in this transition. And also on the Asian side, you see that banks are picking up this topic. And by the way, governments as well. You know that now Germany has launched an approach to launch green bonds. It is clearly accelerating on the capital markets there.
Before I ask the next question, I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying, especially regarding American banks, because on the Forest and Finance report, you see that mainly the main banks that are being quoted as investing heavily into deforestation, they're mostly American banks. So I don't know if it's because of a lack of regulation there, and that actually links to the question that was asked after that is, what do you need to drive more saving, more, I guess, investments going into sustainable finance? Is it regulation? Is it activism? Is it other? And I might add, not only what do you need to drive more, but what do you need to drive more and faster? Because as we said earlier, we're in an emergency and we still see these reports coming up. So what's needed? Is it more activism? Is it more concerns from the people? Or do we need more regulation? Or does it just need to come from the banks themselves?
Well, maybe just to come back on that report, we are also mentioned in that report. To be honest, we are open for such reports. It has moved always, also our company to step forward, but we also appeal also to the authors of such a report to have a dialogue before they launch the report, because also on our side, we were not entirely, I think it was not entirely complete. Now, the question is, what would move it further? I think indeed, it is clearly customers. Customers will move things forward. Finance itself, the capital markets will move things forward, because capital markets are looking for what? They're looking in the end for return. And return in the long run is based on a reduced risk. And those companies, and the COVID crisis has shown that, those companies that are aware of what is happening in the world and are taking into account environmental and social concern, the risk is lower and the return on the long term is higher. But I think finance cannot solve everything. We will need the framework of the governments. We will need guidelines such as Europe says we're going to be climate neutral by 2050 and we're going to set frameworks. We will need those frameworks in particular, and that's a whole different debate, of course, in terms of what's the price of carbon and how do you manage that? There are different systems in the world. It's carbon tax or trading systems. What works best? And there governments have to play a role.
Thank you. We're reaching the limit, so maybe Gert and Dan, if you just in 30 seconds could answer the question.
I fully agree with Wilfried. It will be not one or the other. It will be really the combination of all players, all stakeholders working together. Governments, banks, industry, NGOs, our clients. So it will be really an effort that has to be shared by everybody. And then perhaps one little point, and then I close, to come back on the former point. We are publishing this month our Terra update report on where we are with climate. So I would invite everybody to have a look at the Terra report that will be published on our website. So you'll have a very good idea on where we are with the implementation of these policies.
Thanks. Dan, what about you? What's the last point? What do you think is going to move things forward and faster?
I completely agree. It's a combination of all stakeholders, of course, but as we have a retail audience, I would say to make it as transparent and clear as possible for the retail investors in what they are investing into. And that is for me the key element. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. It was a pleasure having this discussion with you. Mayur, I'm giving the floor back to you.
Thanks a lot, Chloe. It's okay if we go a minute or two overboard, but it's such a relevant discussion and topic that I think it deserves. And what we'll do is for everyone watching, and I think I should have mentioned it earlier, but one thing we wanted to do was that as a Zero Waste Festival would do, we want to get being jargon-free as much as possible as finance. So it's a path. We are not perfect. Let us accept that. So I'm just going to launch a poll. So if you could rate the session as well as tell us how much financial jargon we used during the session, that would be good. So I'm just launching the poll. You will see it on your screen. So if you could just poll and let us know.
I thought I could vote, and then I saw host and panelists can't vote, so I'll just.
Sorry, we were the culprits, Chloe. So this time. Okay, I think everyone's kind of voted in. I'm just giving it another 5 seconds. Guys, we'll close it in the next 2 seconds. So if you could just finish the votes. And okay, perfect, guys. So we're closing the polling, and I can share the results. It's pretty good, actually. I mean, for a session which is talking about reporting, talking about money, there are 45% of the people who kind of felt that there was not much jargon. So thanks a lot to everyone for coming. I'm very happy. I'm afraid I have the same feeling as you. But thanks to everyone for joining. Chloe, thanks a lot for crowdsourcing these questions and bringing it up. I think, Wilfred, what you said was very apt, as people coming up with reports are the idea. And I think what we spoke about is that the core is to kind of initiate a dialogue between the multiple stakeholders, and that's what we are trying to do. But thanks a lot for coming and sharing your views openly with us. Really appreciate that. So thank you everyone for joining.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.